Okay. Okay. Welcome, Dr. Payne from the University of Southern California, talking about affect regulation in smoking women. Thank you, Dr. Payne.
All right, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about some of my research, which is really focused on smoking in women and gender differences. So we've had a lot of talks about, the health implications of smoking already, so I'm not going to really get into that. But as I mentioned, my research really focuses on gender differences in smoking in women, and one of the main reasons I'm interested in this is because of the gender disparities in smoking. So women compared to men, there is some evidence for increased smoking-related disease morbidity and mortality. So there was one study showing that as smokers age, women smokers actually have a faster decline in lung function compared to men. We also have already heard a little bit about women-specific health complications from smoking, but there have been studies showing things like endogenous estrogen use through things like birth control can actually interact synergistically with nicotine use to increase stroke risk. There's also a risk to fetuses of pregnant mothers who smoke as well. So some of the health risks to women actually extends beyond the smoker itself to future generations as well. And lastly, there is some evidence suggesting that women, despite kind of these increased health risks, there is some evidence that women may experience poor cessation success. So my research is really focused on women to kind of try and see what specific factors really contribute to smoking in women, and hopefully that can translate to gender-specific smoking cessation research. So negative affect is known to play an important role in smoking. There's been a lot of laboratory-based studies showing that negative affect through abstinence or negative mood induction leads to increased cigarette craving, increased smoking behavior, etc. And it's also been shown in cessation studies that negative affect tends to precede smoking lapse risk. Additionally, there is some evidence that negative affect may actually play a greater role in smoking in women compared to men. So there have been laboratory-based studies showing that women compared to men actually experience greater negative affect due to smoking abstinence. And there is also evidence that they may experience greater relief of negative affect from smoking. So when they abstain from smoking, their negative affect increases greatly, and then when they actually resume smoking, their negative affect decreases a lot. But in this research, a lot of the laboratory-based studies have been somewhat underpowered, and they also haven't accounted for actual smoking behavior. So we used a within-subject design in which we experimentally manipulated smoking abstinence. So we had participants come in to one session after abstaining from smoking for 16 hours and to another session after smoking as usual. And then we looked at changes in mood, both positive and negative mood. And additionally, we measured their ability to refrain from smoking when smoking is monetarily reinforced. So this is smoking lapse pass. Participants are paid, we pay them 20 cents for every 5 minutes they refrain from smoking. And the idea with this is the more smoking is valued, so like especially if you haven't smoked for 16 hours, you're going to really undervalue that money. You're going to ignore it, and you're going to choose to smoke immediately. And so the first thing we were interested in looking at was the effect of gender on abstinence-induced changes in mood. And we did find that females experienced greater abstinence-induced increases in negative affect. We didn't see any differences in positive affect. Then we wanted to see if these abstinence-induced changes in mood mediated abstinence-induced changes in time to delay smoking. And we did see that anger did mediate this relationship. So females experienced greater abstinence-induced increases in anger, and that mediated their time it decreased their time to delay smoking when they abstained from smoking. So they were angrier, and then they wanted to smoke much quicker in the test. So this is really consistent with that literature suggesting greater abstinence-induced negative affect, and that may lead to greater smoking. So over time, these relationships could lead to greater expectations that smoking actually relieves negative moods. And so there actually is this negative reinforcement smoking expectancies are expectations that a smoker has that smoking will actually relieve negative moods. And these expectancies are associated with smoking escalation, cessation success, cigarette craving, and urge to smoke. And kind of given that literature that negative affect may be more important in smoking in women, there has actually been reports showing that women compared to men report greater negative reinforcement smoking expectancies. However, women compared to men also experience other mood-related differences. So women tend to experience more depression and anxiety symptoms, and that hasn't been controlled for in previous studies. And women also report more just pro-smoking expectancies. So things like they tend to endorse that smoking will help them maintain their weight more. So we wanted to control for these other gender differences and see if these still held true. So we used a cross-sectional design in 2 samples. One was a non-treatment seeking sample from Los Angeles, and one was a treatment seeking sample from Burlington, Vermont, and Tallahassee, Florida. And similar to previous reports, we did note that females compared to males had greater negative reinforcement smoking expectancies. And these remained at least at the trend level after controlling for mood and anxiety symptoms and other pro-smoking expectancies. So it does seem like there may be something unique to the negative reinforcement smoking expectancies. So kind of the conclusions from these first 2 studies, the implications is, I think this is really just furthering the research suggesting that negative affect and finding alternatives to relieving negative affect from smoking may be really important to women, and it may really help with cessation efforts. And so by finding these alternatives, hopefully you can also break these associations between negative affect relief and smoking. Additionally, I'm kind of interested in looking again at female-specific factors in smoking, which is kind of focused on a lot of menstrual cycle and premenstrual symptoms. So I also was interested in looking at premenstrual symptoms and smoking expectancies. And there is evidence that smoking abstinence increases both withdrawal and premenstrual symptoms. And there's also evidence that women actually experience greatest withdrawal during the week before they start their next period, so during that premenstrual phase. Additionally, there's evidence that the nicotine patch itself offsets premenstrual symptoms. So I was interested in looking at whether or not women who experience more severe forms of premenstrual symptoms, if they have greater expectations for the reinforcing effects of smoking and also for kind of negative effects of smoking abstinence. And so I looked at premenstrual symptoms and predicting negative reinforcement smoking expectancies, positive reinforcement smoking expectancies, and smoking abstinence withdrawal. And I did find that women who experience greater premenstrual symptoms do endorse greater reinforcement smoking expectancies and withdrawal expectancies. And the strongest association was actually with the smoking abstinence withdrawal. So these women say that if they abstain from smoking, they're going to experience really severe withdrawal. And so I think this is preliminary research, but I'm pretty excited about it because I think it has clinical implications as well as research implications. So I think clinically, again, it's kind of bringing up, you're kind of finding a subset of women which may have poor cessation success. There's actually been studies showing that. But there might be one kind of mechanism, so addressing things like withdrawal may be particularly important in these women. And I think in research end, it's also really important. We look at a lot of gender studies. I've been really interested in gender differences and expectancies. But it is important to kind of try and see if maybe there's a subset of women who may be driving these gender differences. So women who experience really severe premenstrual symptoms may be driving kind of these gender differences. I want to thank my collaborators at USC, Adam Leventhal, Matt Kirkpatrick, Director and Co-Director of HEAL, also the Health, Emotion, and Addiction Laboratory, UCLA, Marty, and these were funded by Back-Related Disease Research Program and a K Award. Thank you.
Fascinating talk. Time for questions. Just one of your questions.
However, the monitoring enticement to enable them to, maintain the smoking habit. Is there any environmental factors that they control to mitigate the habit?
So you're talking about, are we controlling for environmental factors?
Right.
So all of these studies were, in the first study I talked about, it was a lab-based study. So the smoking lapse analog task, I think, is interesting because we control for all of that stuff because it's in the lab. On the flip side, so pretty much they can smoke or they can do absolutely nothing. So they can't read, they can't listen to music, they can't do anything. So I think it really controls for a lot of environment, which is good. But on the flip side, I think there is a little bit of a disconnect because most of the time it's not you can smoke or you can sit here for 50 minutes doing nothing. So there is a lot of environmental control in that with that one task.
Other than that, when they leave, go back home. The stressor can make children more secure, like family, environment, and
yeah, so that's one of the, again, that's one of the downsides of, the benefit of a lab-based study is you have a lot of control. The downside is, again, yes, what does this relate to outside of the lab? I actually was recently awarded a K award, which is going to use ecological momentary assessment, which is a cell phone, surveys on a cell phone in the day-to-day. So I'm hoping to kind of see some of those differences, how this will actually relate to things outside of the lab. So sometimes you can do things like Q presentation with ecological momentary assessment. So there's evidence that if you send a picture of a cigarette to depressed individuals, they're more likely to respond to that by smoking in the natural environment as well. But there's it's a little bit of a different technique to look a little bit outside of the lab.
Emily?
Really interesting work. I'm excited to see what the DNA shows. Have you also considered adding in topography measures at all, or look at that?
Of the smoking topography?
Can you explain what topography is?
So by smoking topography, you actually measure puff volume, puff duration, et cetera. We haven't done it in this study, and that is really important. We did I didn't present this data, we haven't looked at it. We did do a controlled smoking procedure. That's actually generally what we do more in our lab now. So with that, you actually have a presentation where you have the participants inhale and exhale, and then we have them measure cigarette effects. So by that, we're hoping to kind of at least normalize actual topography. But yeah, we don't have that data right now. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Our next speaker, Dr. Preventive from UC Irvine, talking on nicotine and brain development.
Thank you.